Members, I'll call the March 26th meeting of the Transportation Committee to order. And today we're going to have an informational hearing on Metro Transit governance reform proposals. And with that, we'll turn it over to Chair Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Although we don't have a quorum yet, I think we should get started because I think we are on House TV today, and so we'll want to be respectful of folks' time, the viewers' time, as we talk about this issue and hopefully set the stage for some great discussion in the interim and going into the next legislative season. Members, you'll recall this bill has had a presentation in front of Chair Peggy Scott's Metropolitan Governance Reorganization meeting because when it comes to metropolitan governance, transit is the largest single component. Transit and transportation is the largest single component of what the Metropolitan Council does in the metropolitan area currently. Members, out of nearly an $800 million biennial budget, transit alone is something in the neighborhood of $500 million. If not quite this biennium, it certainly will cross that number next year. That is a big number, and it's a lot of activity. Over the years, there's been a lot of discussion in this place about the place of transit in the general fund, in the scheme of things, and as it is juxtaposed against not only highway transportation, but against the suburbs versus the core cities, the appearance that some win and some don't. Sometimes it's not economic and engineering decisions that drive, or information that drives decisions, but it appears to be political considerations. North Metro versus East Metro versus South Metro, and so on and so forth. So over the years, there's been a lot of interest and discussion about the whole governance of transportation and transit in particular in the Twin Cities. So a few years ago, the Legislative Audit Commission, in their program of work, asked the state or the legislative auditor to look at transit governance in the metropolitan area. I think it was supported bipartisanly, supported by folks in the urban core, and clear out to the suburban fringe. Said, yes, let's have somebody as trusted and as unbiased as the legislative auditor look at transit governance. The result was a report that was released in January of 2011, Transit Governance in the Twin Cities. We've all had copies of it. Many copies have been reprinted a few times. This document is floating around, generating all kinds of fascinating and I think very good discussion. The assertions, the findings of the legislative auditor are, of course, to be debated for years to come. But basically, the gist of the discussion was, without getting in too deep with the Metropolitan Council, was that you can't just talk about transit governance in a vacuum. All roads lead back to the Metropolitan Council members. And the scope of this bill, although it's affected by and influenced by that comment, the conclusion was that metropolitan governance needs to be revisited, which goes beyond the scope of this committee, and that transit probably would be better served in the Twin Cities if there was some way to take the planning, the regional planning and oversight organization away from the day-to-day transit operations, to somehow divorce those, separate those, that there had become almost an attitude of mistrust, or at least suspicion, to put a kinder word on it, between those that were actually trying to move people and paying for it and those that were actually managing the day-to-day operations of the largest component, the Metropolitan Transit Company. That there were untenable positions that people were put in, awkward positions, and they even used the words conflict of interest, although I think that's pretty strong language. Certainly we can agree that things were awkward, and it's sometimes being responsible for running the largest transit provider while overseeing the smaller opt-outs and other transit providers, including, I might add, the private companies, who rarely get mentioned in this discussion, was leading to some awkward and uncomfortable moments, and even allowing questions to be raised about the efficacy of having one unelected, appointed body overseeing the lion's share of transit in the Twin Cities, which led to some discussions. As chair of this committee, of course, I'm fascinated and interested in all things transportation, particularly in maximum mobility for the dollars that the taxpayers provide us. In that setting, I think local officials probably are a little more attuned to what's going on in their communities when it comes to public transportation, and particularly when it's juxtaposed against the need for roads and bridges. Members, one size does not fit all. That's one of the premises I started with when I invited several of my friends that I'm familiar with over the last 15 years of service in this area, starting with City Council and Regional Transit Board service back in the mid-'90s, culminating now with 2 years as the chairman of this committee, that led to the drafting and actually it's not introduced as a bill yet, Mr. Chairman and members, but in your packet you have House File XXXX. You have the document that is the starting point for discussions, hopefully going forward, as we talk about how we can reorganize transit in the Twin Cities. Mr. Chairman, that kind of brings me to the presentation of the file itself, which I think actually has the number MB115 on top of it. So if you'll direct your attention to that and to, I believe, the bill summary that Mr. Burris has prepared for us. I'm just going to quickly walk through the bill. A lot of it's technical and legal in nature, because if we're going to do something as big as move a couple thousand employees and almost 1,000 buses and bus garages and a couple of train sets and railway corridors from a metropolitan planning organization to a regional transportation governance organization, there's a lot of legalese that has to happen to make that take place effectively without having everything come grinding to a halt while we're in the process of that. So, members, if you look quickly just at the bill, the Article 1 of the bill is an overview and describes the transfers that I'm proposing happen between the Metropolitan Council. And, oh, by the way, this bill presupposes that there is something that succeeds the current Metropolitan Council, and we just refer to it in here as the Metropolitan Council. In my opinion, members, there still has to be somebody to make sure the toilets flush, that the regional parks line up, and that basically gives some overview coordination effort to the larger metropolitan, 7-county metropolitan area. And I'm going to refer from time to time to the council, and it presupposes that that continues to exist and it continues to have representation in some equal fashion, meaning redistricting will apply to the Metropolitan Council just as it has in the past. But when it comes to the underpinning economic development and movement in the Twin Cities, it presupposes the creation of a new board called the Regional Transportation Governance Board. Article 1 talks about those transfers we just talked about. If we're going to do something this big and this audacious and this far-reaching, there is a lot of stuff to be transferred: powers, appointments, transition, bank accounts, bond responsibilities, legal definitions, and so on and so forth. Article 2 then talks about the Regional Transportation Governance Board, its powers and duties with transit, with transportation planning, with planning and programming going forward. Members, there is, at one point in one of my presentations, there was a document talking about the Regional Transportation Governance Board sort of being like the reorganized TAB, Transportation Advisory Board, on steroids. Just a brief sidebar, Mr. Chairman and members. The Transportation Advisory Board was formed several years ago. There's a whole other committee we can have just talking about that, about how it was formed to help comply with federal law, that there needed to be a preponderance of local elected officials on a transportation oversight board in order for federal money to flow through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I know I'm throwing a lot of names around that are making your head spin, but when you've been steeped in it for a while, you begin to actually follow this stuff. There's a scary thought. But members, what I've done basically is take the Transportation Advisory Board, which has a preponderance of local elected officials, and elevated that to the status of the Regional Transportation Governance Board. So it also oversees not only transit and transit planning, but also the people who operate. To be clear, it does not operate anything. It plans and administers and helps set the budgets. It also oversees the highway component that MnDOT's Metropolitan District reports to, and oversees coordination with the Metropolitan Airport Commission as the details get worked out. Members, that's what the Regional Transportation Governance Board does. It also will have, and this is an important component, and I'll conclude my remarks in a moment with this, it also has levying authority. This is important going forward for two reasons in particular. Each one of the counties, I think 6 of the counties to be precise, currently has a regional regional rail authority. that can buy. They were formed back mostly in the 70s and 80s to acquire rights-of-way from railroads that were abandoning rights-of-way, knowing how difficult those would be to assemble going forward, that it was probably a prudent thing to do, and I would tend to agree, to assemble some methodology or some method. The regional rail authorities turned out to be them to actually hold those right-of-ways in, keep them intact for possible future purposes. The Regional Transportation Governance Board would then take over the authority, the obligations of those separate authorities, so that they would, for bond purposes, continue to exist until their bonds were paid and until that expired. But that levy authority to pay off the bonds that the regional rail authorities hold would continue under this new entity. Also, when we get down to how we pay for transit in the Twin City area, the metropolitan area going forward, they will have to have the levying authority that the Met Council currently enjoys to actually reinstitute the transit taxing district, extend that to the entire 7-county metro area, and that's one reason having local elected officials control this organization is so important, because at the end of the day, elected officials, people that actually stand for election and hold an election certificate, will be the ones that will actually do the truth in taxation statements and ask for not only the capital bonding levy authority, which Met Council currently employs, but the reinstituted transit tax to actually pay for public transit in the metropolitan area, particularly between the various counties. And so that's why the preponderance of the board has to be, in my opinion, elected officials. The makeup of the board, as I'm proposing it for the starting point of discussions, is 2 county commissioners from each county in the 7-county metro area. They will self-select from the county boards. It presupposes that there will continue to be 16 commissioner districts for the Metropolitan Council, or whatever the planning organization is going forward, and that the governor gets to appoint an elected official, in this case, that has to be someone that serves on a city or town board, not another county official. Cities and towns would be appointed, one from each of those districts, to represent them on this new Transportation Governance Board. Those folks then will be the preponderance, the majority of people on the Regional Transportation Governance Board. To meet the federal requirements for a metropolitan planning organization, there are a few other folks that have to be on that board that are citizens at large that represent various interest groups. Members, I'm sorry to say I don't have all of those details in front of you at the moment, but I know there's another handful, 5, 6, 7 folks that need to be on that board as well, and I propose that they would also be selected by the governor. There's a staggered terms provision in the bill, so that you have to be elected to be on the board, you serve for a period of time, and that the governor's appointments in particular cannot all go off at the same time, because we will want some continuity going forward as we cross from one administration to another at the state level. Let's see, at some point here, there is a description in the bill of the Metropolitan Transit Company itself. Members, back in the late 80s through the mid-90s, there existed a group called the Regional Transportation Board, the RTB. I served on that. The Metropolitan Transit Commission at that time was a separate commission made up of 5 commissioners, I believe it was, who oversaw the day-to-day operations and budgets of the Metropolitan Transit Commission. At that time, we called it the Big Red Bus Company. Everyone, including the opt-outs and the other transit providers, all reported to the Metropolitan Council through the RTB, through the Regional Transit Board. So the Regional Transit Board helped coordinate the service, approve the capital budgets, approve the operating budgets, and overseeing the fare box collation ratios of those. But the Metropolitan Transit Commission actually ran its own operation, had its own standalone governance board. My proposal in this bill is to reconstitute the Metropolitan Transit Commission, and that it be its members will serve from the territory in which their service territory actually exists. So the opt-outs would not have anybody on the Metropolitan Transit Commission's board, and vice versa. They would all be as equals in front of the Regional Transportation Governance Board, the RTGB, that the bill is proposing. That way we get away from one of the other major findings of the legislative auditor, that having the regional planning organization that channels all of the federal money actually being in charge of the single largest operating entity in the area puts everyone else at a disadvantage, at least a perceived disadvantage, and creates the appearance of the conflict of interest. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, conflict of interest is a very big word. I don't know that we go that far, but it certainly does make for some awkward and untenable moments whenever, for instance, their Metropolitan Council is at this body, lobbying this body for more money at the exclusion of, say, the opt-out and alternative service providers. If this bill becomes law or a version of it, members, I would submit that they'd all be on equal footing, they'd all have their own budgets to worry about, and we wouldn't be pitting one transit company against another. And that is one of the most important things I think this committee should consider as this bill moves forward and as we talk about these things going forward. Members, I think that's pretty much the high points and the rationale behind the House, the file that you have in front of you, file MB115. Again, if you're just joining us late, there is no House file because the bill has not been dropped. And members, it's not my intention to drop this bill this year, but to move it forward in this configuration, and hopefully in the interim and after we get our elections out of the way this fall, those of us who come back here next year will have a starting point for having serious discussions about how we can reform transit governance and financing in the Twin Cities. Mr. Chairman and members, there's a few people that would like to talk about the bill, to talk about the ideas as they helped me put this together, and then I have a few concluding remarks, or if there are burning questions at this very moment, I'm happy to pause for a few questions from members before the testifiers come.
Okay, thank you, Chair Beard. We do have a quorum here, so I would ask someone to approve the minutes from the 21st.
Mr. Chair, I approve the minutes.
Representative Benson moves to approve the minutes. Members, any additions or changes to minutes? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. And we will, members, any questions so far of Chair Beard on this bill? Representative Hornstein.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and Chairman Beard, what are the main areas that your concept differs from what was the status quo in 1994? With the, you were on that board, so you clearly would know a little bit more than I in terms of how that was governed. But what would be a couple of the main differences?
Chair Beard.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornstein, members, thank you for the question. As I'm recalling the RTB makeup at that time, it was a rather small board. I think there were 7 to 9 members on it. Those members had to be 5 or 6 of them. The preponderance was local elected officials. I kept my city council position while I served. Indeed, that was one of the requirements. As I recall, we were actually selected and appointed by the Metropolitan Council, however. So there was not exactly the arm's length relationship with the Met Council, although, to be fair, the Met Council did not control the Metropolitan Transit Commission at that time. So that was probably the biggest difference. The Regional Transit Board, through the Metropolitan Council, did levy the transit tax to help fill the budget. That was a big part of what it was. And at that time, none of the motor vehicle sales tax money came to the transit for transit funding. We basically did fare box recovery and property tax recovery, as I recall. Somebody could feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But it was a small committee. It had no oversight over roads and bridges and larger transportation planning. It only focused on the opt-outs and on the operation of the Metropolitan Transit Commission and how they interacted with each other at that time.
Follow-up?
Thank you. And then one sort of additional historical question that I'm interested in your perspective on.
Certainly.
When I served on the Met Council, that was in 2001 where we took it off of the property tax.
Yes.
And so I'm interested in your thoughts about why you think we should go back, because we're really going back to a couple of things in 94 and then in 2001. So I'm interested in your ideas about that.
Chair Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornstein, for reminding me that I did not discuss that in my comments. If I recall right, in the late 90s, there were a succession of multi-hundred million dollar, if not billion-dollar surpluses in the State General Fund. And they squabbled over here at the Capitol, and I say that respectfully, at the time, and And remind you, I was not in the legislature, even interested in running for the legislature in 1998, 9, 2000, or 2001, was how do we give it back, what do we do? And one of the proponents of cutting taxpayers a break instead of just handing them another refund check was, I know, let's move transit off of the property tax and do away with that component. Now, this is the history that I've been told by several people who were involved in that. Let's move transit to the general fund, and we'll backfill the needs of the transit operators from the general fund since we have so much money here. Let's do that. There were several initiatives that were done at that time, but as the conclusion, I believe, of the Ventura administration, part of the big idea was let's do away with let's give some property tax relief across the city, and instead we'll use some of these surpluses going forward. I think, Representative Hornstein, since you and I and Representative Nelson came in here 10 years ago, I'm trying to remember the last time we had a surplus that we could do something like that with. I think it was in 2006 when we handed you a couple $2 billion, and of course, then the economy went right in the toilet again. And the ability to talk about even moving transit funding upward and outward, in spite of the motor vehicle sales tax being dedicated constitutionally, has changed quite a bit. So I don't think going forward we're going to see billion-dollar surpluses, and I'm thinking that if we could, having lived through 10 years of squabbling about how much is enough for transit, if we took it out of the general fund, put it back on the local property tax, since it seems to serve a local need, and I'll stress this point again in my closing remarks, one size does not fit all. We can allow those local elected officials who serve on this board to have some level of accountability for levying a property tax to fill for the operating subsidy. It just seems to me to be prudent to tie those two together. It worked well then. Let's make it work. The intervening 10 years, I've felt nothing but angst, pain, and confrontation, and I'm interested in avoiding that with transit if we can do that at all.
Thank you.
Members, any further questions of Chair Beard? If not, let's call down our first testifier, and it's Rhonda Sivaraja. Sorry.
I just call her Madam Commissioner.
Madam Commissioner, welcome to our committee, and please give us your name and your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I often joke that my maiden name was Larson, and that would have been a heck of a lot easier than Sivaraja. So, my name is Rhonda Sivaraja, and I am chair of the Anoka County Board of Commissioners. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on the draft legislation. The introduction of staggered terms is important for not only the continuity issue, but also because there's a huge learning curve. And if you do not have some people on board who are very knowledgeable on the issues, what will happen is that it becomes a very staff-driven organization, which is the situation that I think we've found ourselves in today. Separating transit functions from the Met Council is positive in that then all the transit agencies could be evaluated on a very fair basis. With the current makeup, you have the agency overseeing transit also operating transit, so they're really not a neutral party in the whole situation. I do have a few questions and concerns that we look forward to working with Representative Beard on in the coming months. Under Article 3, I have some concerns about the regional rail levy. In our county, what we've attempted to do in the past few years is actually bring that levy down. And if it went to kind of a metro-wide situation, just concerned that we would see those levies increasing, but again, recognize that that would be a decision of those local elected officials on that board. Under Article 4, Subdivision 2, I have concerns about the makeup of the Transit Commission being focused on the urban core. There are opt-out counties that provide their own transit service. However, in Anoka County, we actually receive our transit service through the Met Council. And so if there's only one suburban representative at the table, I just am concerned about the services being focused on really the urban core rather than looking at services on a wider basis. So I would like to see a little more equitable makeup there. Under Article 4, Section 2, Subdivision 7, this section may give more flexibility, as currently there's really no expansion within this area, and this may also give us alternatives where transit service is currently not available, so certainly appreciate that. I do think it would be helpful, however, to have both the Transportation Management Organization Advisory Committee and the Metro Transit Commission ride-sharing program both report to the Commissioner of Transportation, so that there would be a review of the transit management organizations in the same manner as the Regional Transit Governing Board proposes to review all the transit agencies. So there'd be a little more consistency. Under Article 5, Subdivision 4B, which is actually like line 22.28, I think we need some more clarification, because right now the Met Council uses, I believe, about 3 different definitions for a bus rapid transit, including arterial transit ways located within the core ring, where basically they've taken our regular route services, dressed them up, added some different ways of paying the fares, so that now they're called arterial transit ways, or bus transit. And we want to make sure that we really know exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about bus rapid transit, because there are too many definitions out there. But I do really appreciate the efforts of Representative Beard. I think that he has done an excellent job of really moving us in the right direction in pulling transit separate from the current Met Council, because I do think it is an area that needs to be separated from a lot of the other planning functions. And I know it is a very difficult area to tackle, and he has done an excellent job of really listening to our concerns, gathering input, and I just appreciate his efforts in that area and look forward to continuing to work with him in the coming months. So thank you, Representative Beard.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Sivaraja. Got it right that time, I hope. Members, any questions of the testifier? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, we have John Ulrich.
Mr. Chairman.
And, Gary Shelton. You guys want to come down together?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
While they're coming, may I just make a couple remarks to the Commissioner's comments?
certainly.
They are very well taken, and is kind of exemplify the give and take that was going on in the private brainstorming sessions that I had with a couple of folks individually and in small groups. She raises some very good points, and it's one reason I wanted to tee this bill up for discussion, because there's a lot of collective wisdom yet that needs to weigh in on this. I can imagine taking this around to the what I call the alphabet groups, League of Minnesota Cities and the metropolitan counties and so on, to weigh in on this as it moves forward. And so I certainly value the Commissioner's testimony and thank her for input into these things.
Okay. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourselves, please, and tell us your story.
Yeah, I'm John Ulrich, Scott County Commissioner.
And I'm Gary Shelton, Scott County Administrator.
I've also been a member of the TAB, Transportation Advisory Board, for 12 years. I'd like to just talk about the need for change. Why is a change needed? And as you know, the MPO is made up of the TAB and the Met Council combined. Without this combined relationship, the Met Council could not be the metropolitan planning organization for the Twin Cities. It requires elected officials, and so there's this combination that's kind of unique to our area. I don't think there's any area like this in the rest of the country that has this arrangement. And I would say over many of the years being on the TAB, it's worked fairly well. But I would say over time, most recently, last number of years, it hasn't worked very well. And I want to give you some examples of why I see problems. I would say the Met Council itself has become more directive, making more policy pronouncements and directives without consulting the TAB, without involving the TAB, and really in opposition to some of the feelings of the TAB. They've just gone along with some of these pronouncements, and I want to give you some examples, a few examples of the kind of problems I've seen over the last few years with the arrangement. First of all, I would say the Transportation Policy Plan. That's the document that guides our planning for the metropolitan area for transportation needs, and that was recently updated within the last couple of years. And you'd think that that plan would, in its fullness, be presented to the full makeup of all the TAB members, the full board, and presented in its fullness. You'd think that that would have been done in the process. It was not done. Then you'd think that that policy plan would go out for public comment, which it did. It went out for public comment. But you'd think those public comments then would come back to the TAB and be presented in their fullness to us, and then also the Met Council responses to those. What were their responses to those comments, and how did they deal with them? How did they take them into consideration? You'd think that would have been done. No, it was not done. And then you'd think that finally the final transportation policy plan would have been presented to the partners that make us the MPO together with the Met Council. You'd think that would be presented to us for us to consider thoughtfully and make comments, and you'd get the presentation of the full document, final document. That didn't happen either. In fact, on the day we were asked to vote, and we ended up voting, we were told that if you want to see the full plan, if you want to see the final plan, the policy plan, it'll be online later in the week. And I would say that was just totally inappropriate for an equal partner in the transportation policy planning of the metropolitan area to have the TAB set aside and really gone around in this process. Now, I think they tried to come back and correct some in January. About a month afterwards, they came back and presented what were the concerns, some of the concerns. They categorized some of the concerns, and I'm thinking, well, what good is this? The plan has been adopted. Now, you're presenting the concerns to us now a month after the fact. It was goofy. That's just one problem. CMAQ, congestion mitigation air quality grants, that we go through a scoring process, and projects are selected to do projects that will reduce congestion and improve air quality. And those projects have always been matched by the Regional Transit Capital Fund without any discussion, without any awareness from the TAB. It was announced by the Met Council to all our partners that they're going to pick and choose which one of those funds are going to be matched. I mean, whether they're going to match with the Regional Transit Capital Funds, whether they're going to match the CMAQ projects that have gone through the process of the TAB, and they've scored and they've been selected and they've showed their merit, and now the Met Council wants to take control of that and say, we're going to pick and choose on a case-by-case basis from the Regional Transit Capital Fund whether we're going to match those. And in the past, they've always been matched. Also, RALPH, Right-of-Way Loan Acquisition Fund, it's been announced to Anoka County without any discussion got a letter saying that right-of-way you bought for that interregional corridor, policies have changed. We'd like you to sell the land and send the money back without discussion, without debate, with the TAB, without the TAB even knowing. And these get raised at the TAB, and we never get a presentation. Why? What are you thinking? We're partners. We're equals with you. We make up the MPO together. You're not the MPO alone, and that's been a problem. And our view in Scott County is that the makeup of the TAB does not itself even comply with federal law in terms of the makeup. Now, there's been some comments from Federal Highway on the functioning of how things function, how we go about creating plans and policies and picking projects. They apparently have commented saying that they accept, but they never really commented on the makeup, whether our MPO-TAB relationship complies with federal law. And I think federal law is very clear, our attorneys do as well, that our makeup does not comply with federal law. And so we're asking for a change that would put elected officials where they should be in guiding policy planning for the metropolitan area. And we're asking that the plan comply with federal law, that the makeup of we would see it like a TAB-like organization, like you have in your bill, would become the MPO, and the TAB would be replaced with this new board, and that would be the MPO with elected officials really guiding policy and the planning. And otherwise, we've got a situation where we have staff-run organization that's not accountable to the public. And so I would call for change. It's a time to change the structure of our MPO.
Thank you, Mr. Ulrich. And Mr. Shelton? Oh, pardon me, question? Representative Lander?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ulrich, in the policy plan that the Met Council produces, are there tax levy decisions within that plan?
Mr. Ulrich?
The transit taxing district is a levy that's there. Within the I'm not sure they.
Let me try to.
I would say no. No, but how the transit taxing district and the regional transit capital fund is used is impacted by that.
Representative Leiter.
Thank you. So, I guess what I'm driving at, what I'm trying to understand is the relationship between you as a representative of your county. You've said that you have no input to the plan, Met Council plan, and yet the plan deals with taxing authority and policies pertaining to that.
Mr. Ulrich.
Okay, well, I don't want to overstate it to say we have no. Our role has been reduced over time in the policy plan creation. And to be fair to the Met Council, I think they've taken steps to make sure this never happens again as well. So I want to be fair on that. Okay, the tab also, we score projects and we select projects and that will get funded, and we have a strong role in regard to that. But really what the transit policy plan, it kind of creates the parameters or the box and how the policies and how the projects will line up with those policies or whether they do or not. And so it's very important for us to have a role in the overall policy of what's going to be funded. We still have a strong role in the selection of specific projects and the scoring and so forth, but it's the policy plan that we need to have a stronger role.
Follow up.
What I didn't want to do is just focus on one piece of the whole plan, but I actually kind of find it disturbing as we read the auditor's report on this, and then to hear this kind of testimony that in fact we have a very difficult time for the tab and those that are members of that having essentially very little interaction with the Met Council and your dealings with the plan. This is what was brought to us last year, and we've been working on this year, and to hear it firsthand from you as a member is pretty disturbing, and there's it illustrates this disconnect. And so I focused on the taxation part of it because, I mean, it's almost as though there's taxation and levies that are being mandated within the policy, and yet there's no representation. Is what I was really driving at. At least in my mind, that's what it seems like.
If I could comment,
please.
The plan does guide and direct how tax money, dollars, are going to ultimately be spent. For example, one of our criticisms of the plan is that it focuses too much within the 494, 694 Beltway and does not account for regional growth as much as need be. There are strong positives with the plan within that framework of they have call them low-cost, high-benefit projects, and that's the focus of the plan in many regards. And that there's a lot of merit to that. But accounting for the growth of our region, the plan does not do a very good job of that. And so, but it is guiding a massive amount of tax dollars through the plan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Good? Okay. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Ulrich. Good to see you again. I enjoyed your testimony when you came to the Legislative Commission on Metropolitan Governance because, you know, while I don't think we're necessarily on the same page with this particular proposal, when you talk about having county officials and local officials involved in governance, I'm right there with you. And I've introduced the House File 2673, which simply all it does is forms a working group, a task force of stakeholders of the Metropolitan Council. You know, the kind that Representative Beard had mentioned. You know, the Association of Minnesota Cities, or it's called Metro Cities now, but and some county groups and business groups, labor groups, et cetera, just to roll up their sleeves, meet over the summer and fall, and make some recommendations to the legislature for next year. Because on the governance piece, I think many of us are on the same page. I don't have a lot of disagreement with either you or Representative Beard on the need to have local officials on in the governance area. I don't necessarily think we need to further balkanize, you know, transit operations and have, you know, a separate regional board for that. But is this something that you feel maybe we ought to do even now, and maybe there's even time this session that we could establish some kind of a working group or task force? Because my fear is that this excellent legislative auditor's report that we've all read, and I think we have an unusual amount of bipartisan agreement on some of the recommendations on this. I worry that this is just going to collect dust, and you know, it might be years before we do anything with this. And why not at least get some people together in the short term, come up with recommendations to the legislature, and see if we can't get something done very, very definitive and concrete next session. Is that something that I think we could all get behind here?
Mr. Ulrich, did you understand that long question?
Yeah, I do, and I would support that effort. You know, it's funny. I've heard testimony about the Met Council over the years, and it seems like the passions of wanting change ebb and flow based on who's in charge, basically. And it's interesting now, more in a unique way, there is more of a bipartisan desire to change the structure of governance. And so I think that's fairly unique, that ebb and flow of change, of supporting it or against it, depending on who's in charge. I think that's more past. We have more widespread interest. And so I would support a working group, yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this is probably more for Chair Beards to answer, but do you envision on this, and Representative Leidiger's question prompted me to think about this, do you envision this of eliminating the Metro Transit Taxing District and expanding that out to the whole 7-county area? Because I know there's been some complaint about that, people that are in, the people that are out. I know when we wanted to extend the bus rapid transit and the urban partnership that we did for 35W, that we had to expand that to include part of Lakeville, and there was some great gnashing of teeth about that. So do you envision this, that the taxing district would match the metropolitan area?
Chair Beard.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Nelson, thank you for the question. Yes, in my remarks, I don't think I made that as clear as I could. Part of the necessity going forward would entail expanding the district to the borders of the 7-county metro area. That's one reason it's important to have 2 county commissioners from each of the 7 counties on the board, in my opinion. Let me just add this caveat. This is not a caucus bill, so if you're wondering about, gee, how about this no new taxes thing? No, that does not apply here. This is Representative Beard's bill with good-hearted and good-natured people who've gotten together to put this together, and I'm running this up the flagpole with my own initiative. Just to be clear, it's in a caucus position, but I think it's a darn good starting point going forward as we talk about how to reorganize all this. And I'm willing to to take the shots if that need be to get the conversation started about why it's important to undo the 2001 legislation Representative Hornstein referred to. So the short answer is yes. Thank you for the question.
Follow-up,
Yeah,
Representative?
thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not asking the question as to be partisan about it. It's a matter of, I know that's an issue that's, because I'm in the tax district, and actually I'm across my other side of my legislative district. You have opt-out, and then you have people that are outside of it. And I know up in our area, when we had a park and ride that disappeared when the Devil's Triangle was taken care of, surveys have shown that the majority of the people that park in that park and ride that's paid for by the Metro Transit District come from outside the taxing district, and it's one of the frustrations we have is they're driving in to use our buses and our infrastructure we built, yet they don't want to pay for it. The other question I guess I would have along that same line, we talk about, there's a lot of talk about we're no longer a 7-county metro area, depending on who you talk to, or an 11 or a 13-county metro area. Do you see this metropolitan district expanding with, if we add additional counties around the ring that want to get in on using the taxing, or excuse me, not the taxing, but the transit itself, and expansion of transit? And along with that, how is this going to affect outstate counties and their outstate metro or outstate transit in St. Cloud, like in Mankato, those different areas around the state?
Chair Beard.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nelson, members, first of all, I am not going to ask other people to come in. That's fight I don't think we need to borrow right now, but I will say that I think the mechanism of having a Transportation Governance Board with its own taxing authority makes it easier for other counties to opt in without having to buy into the whole Metropolitan Council scheme of things. So I think it actually would make it easier for folks to come in for transportation and transit purposes without giving up their parks, their sewerage systems, and whatever else it is the Metropolitan Council does as a system. I think that makes it actually easier. As far as the rest of the state, the auditor's report was metropolitan transit governance, and that seemed to be a big enough bite to try to chew on without getting into the rest of the state. So, no, that's an issue I'll leave for other legislators to get their arms around if they wish.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Beard, and this is more of a statement than a question, but I know we've had lots of talk here. Representative Hausman when we talk about rail transit and light rail and expanding of commuter transit lines, that they cross over borders, and she's long advocated a statewide plan for statewide planning for that, because they do touch multiple areas, and if we go up to the border of Hennepin County and somebody just across Hennepin County line in Wright County that's not in the 7-county decides that they want to participate in this, they're not going to be part of it. So, I mean, I think we need to look at this. I mean, this is a good step, and it's an intriguing, start the discussion, but, we need to look at that also, because as our state expands and grows, we need to not have barriers in the way of that happening.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Mr. Shelton, let's get started. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself. Identify yourself.
Gary Shelton, I'm the Scott County Administrator, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Much of what I would say actually was covered, I think, by Commissioner Ulrich and also brought up in the questions. But my purpose really was simply to testify to this bill would correct what we think is inappropriate in the current metropolitan planning organization, in that it would bring the MPO into both compliance with the spirit, intent, and letter of the federal legislation. The legislation clearly intends, by both the letter and spirit, that the MPO be driven by elected officials and not by appointed officials. It allows for the appointment of representatives from the Department of Transportation, the Pollution Control Agency, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, motorized freight, non-motorized transportation, and 2 transit members. So it anticipates that the parties involved in transportation would also be members of this. But clearly the federal legislation, intent of the federal legislation was this be driven by local elected officials and not by appointed officials. And yet when you look at the current MPO in this metropolitan area, it is substantially different than the MPO in any other portion of the state of Minnesota. It is substantially different than the MPO in any other region of the country that we could find, in that it does 2 things which we think are somewhat perverse and wrong. It makes elected officials, in many respects, advisory to appointed officials, and that's just simply wrong. Elected officials should lead a policy-making process, not be adjunct to it, not be advisory to it, but they should be those persons who the public has elected. We have a representative form of democracy, and the intent is that those folks who people elect will establish the policy which will determine the communities that we live in, will determine the amount we pay in taxes, and by allowing elected officials to be back in charge of the MPO, which was the intent of the federal legislation, you actually would avoid the types of issues that we had with the current TAB process, where the TAB to some extent is treated as purely advisory to the Metropolitan Council. In addition to which, even the TAB in its current structure doesn't comply with federal law in that there are 7 or 8 other appointees. While it is primarily elected officials, there are 7 or 8 other appointees to the TAB that make it quite often difficult for elected officials who also have other functions which they have to attend to actually be there and participate in enough of a majority so that elected officials are really driving that process, which they are not today. And so our board has consistently taken opposition to the structure of the MPO. We've worked, and we thank Representative Beard for his assistance in trying to change that. And really the only thing that I was asked to come here and testify to is the need to allow elected officials and to structure the governance for transportation so that elected officials are driving the wagon and not merely on the wagon and advising the driver.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Members, any questions of the testifier? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody in the audience that would like to discuss this bill or testify on this bill that Chair Beard is working on? Anybody want to come down? Let's not all rush down here at once. Seeing none, Chair Beard, some closing comments?
Closing comments. Thank you, members, for your attention to this matter and for the good discussion we've had so far. I'm looking forward to a lot more of it. Just one housekeeping item. In the bill, when I was talking about some of the components that were being transferred into the proposed Regional Transportation Governance Board, I neglected to mention the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's our friends at CTIB, currently the County Transportation Investment Board. Those duties would be taken over by this board as well. The legislature passed that several years ago. There is an enormous amount of outstanding obligation in the form of bonding, primarily Hennepin County's account, that needs to be protected and needs to be serviced, and those obligations need to be honored. CTIB would continue to exist under my proposal as a committee within the Regional Transportation Governance Board, and would continue to be staffed and operated pretty much as it is now, just as a subset of the new Regional Transportation Governance Board. So that would continue. The operation of the train lines that exist now would be invested in the new proposed Metropolitan Transit Commission, to be clear as well. And if any new transit ways will be selected to be rail-oriented, they could continue to do that. It's just that those funding organizations or funding decisions then would lie with the elected officials who actually represent those areas on this board and on the Metropolitan Transit Commission as it's proposed to be reconstituted. Members, one of the important bills that's moving this time that is not in this one is the reopening of the opt-outs. And you may wonder, how would that affect this going forward? I think it's an important component as we talk about how we make transit work for the local communities that are supposed to operate these lines and these systems. I would encourage that it to be supported as the bill moves forward independently of this in the Transportation Omnibus Bill, because truly one size does not fit all. Members, that's one reason I'm proposing that we go back to the transit taxing district and have local elected officials actually be responsible for those numbers, for that levy, and how that money is accounted for and the service that's provided to their communities. I envision that as this governance board is constituted and asserts its power over planning and operations and the funding of these things, that the tax will not be uniform across the area. Counties that may want to have a little less or maybe need less service would actually levy a tax that perhaps may be a little bit less per dollar value than, say, a county or a city that has high needs and maybe needs more subsidization of service because their demand for service is at a different level. I see the wisdom of this across the board in many different areas. As we move forward with the Governor's Task Force on Transportation Finance and Alternatives, oh, by the way, Representative Morrow and myself are your House representatives on that task force. I don't remember who the Senate is appointed, but that task force apparently is ready to start meeting now over the summer and through next fall, and we're going to be certainly attending that and contributing heartily to the discussion about how we can finance transportation going forward. And I believe this is one of the very viable alternatives that can take transit out of the general fund and avoid some of the wrenching discussions and battles actually we've had here politically and put it back on a footing that has locals in control and responsible for that. Members, with that, I think this bill, I agree with the Commissioner from Anoka County that this bill is heading in the right direction. I don't think it's reached the right destination yet, but certainly I put tires in the bus, put gas in the tank. You're welcome to get on. You're welcome to start this direction, and we can discuss how we get where we're going to go and what that destination should be as it moves forward. Appreciate your attention to these matters.
Well, thank you, Chair Beard, for your work on this bill. I'm sure you have lots and lots of hours in this thing. And Representative Hornstein has a question.
Well, I've been just a quick comment, Mr. I've been waiting to say this, the whole year. But if we do this task force, the wings aren't going to fall off.
Well, true.
No, I'm joking.
He's got a game board here saying this.
Chairman Beard saying, but no, seriously, Mr. Chairman, again, there's some elements, particularly on governance, that I think are worth looking at. But the legislative auditor already was highly critical of the status quo because the auditor's office felt that we already had this incredibly balkanized system of transit, with opt-outs, the council, the CTIB, and everything else. And my concern about your proposal is that it seems like it further balkanizes that, and where we need to just have, I think, more efficiencies in terms of how things are governed. This may not move us in that direction, but I hope that I welcome and appreciate your taking this on in terms of the governance piece, understanding that there is something that needs to be reformed here. And we also have you did it, I think it's mentioned in your bill, and you referred to it. We have the staggered terms, and I'm beginning to think, if that's all we do, I'm really concerned. And so I hope that we can move forward on doing something. You mentioned the the finance group that you and Representative Morrow are part of, but if there's a way we can at least get something going in terms of the stakeholder process and formalize it, require it, put it in law, and then have us as a legislature next year really do the heavy lifting, and of which maybe some of the ideas that you've put forward to could be a part of that, then I think we'll really move forward towards reform. But right now I think we're spinning our wheels a little bit, and I'm not sure that this idea really gets us there. So, but I do appreciate the conversation.
Good.
Okay, well, thank you, members. One note here. We may have a Thursday meeting regarding trunk highway appropriations bill, so please keep your eyes peeled on your emails. Watch for a note from Mr. Nisley here, and probably be Thursday morning, I would assume, sometime, so keep an eye peeled on that. And members, thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Yeah.